This video will contain spoilers from the beginning, so I'm warning you now. The Shogun finale was recently released, following the epic penultimate episode last week. The penultimate episode, like many good series, is usually the one with the most action, and the climax generally serves the aim of bringing everything back down to earth and expanding on what we've seen, which Shogun executed flawlessly. The ending was unclear, yet it also brought clarity and closure while leaving things open. There was no Battle of Sekigahara, as many of us predicted, and it obviously took a page from the 1980s miniseries and novel by treating it almost as a footnote. This is because the show isn't about the Battle of Sekigahara, but rather about everything else that happened around it. Toranaga stated that he sent a woman to do what an army couldn't, a phrase that held great significance. So without further ado, let's get started on this episode. Here is an explanation of the ending to Shogun Episode 10. John's old age and fate throughout the episode. Especially in certain times, there was a focus on Blackthorne in his later years. We didn't know if it was real or not, but it transported us to the future where he was an old guy living in England. But the artifacts exhibited around his room indicated that he fondly remembered his time in Japan. There was a helmet with Toranaga's banner on it, as well as his sword, which was touted as having defeated an entire army. This could indicate that after serving Toranaga, he eventually returned to England. One thing that makes me believe this could be true is that when the picture opened and closed, a clock ticked in the backdrop, seemingly symbolizing the passage of time. However, the fact that he was holding Mariko's crucifix, which he tossed into the ocean when Fujisama scattered her husband and child's ashes, makes me believe it was a dream. In addition, this occurred when John was unconscious as a result of the explosion that murdered Mariko. This moment almost felt like John's dream, which is related to the title. John hoped to leave Japan, return home, and live out his life in England. When he was questioned, was it given to you by a savage? It almost highlighted the shift in thinking that he had, since later in the episode, when he was passed out again, that question came back into his head, and it cut to Mariko on multiple occasions. The series dealt with John's sense of belonging, and how he didn't fit in with the European culture that he was used to, as well as not quite fitting in with the culture and country that he found himself in while in Japan. He had described the inhabitants as savage before ever setting foot in Japan, but by the time he awoke, he had changed his mind. I don't suppose we'll ever know for certain if this scene was a dream or reality, but I believe it was a dream. In reality, the real John Blackthorne, William Adams, never left Japan and remained there until his death. He had children there as well. So if the program wants to stay true to history, as it has done on numerous occasions over its run, I believe this would be behaving as a dream. John's sadness and sense of grieving for Mariko were prominent throughout the show. He had Mariko's cross, which she had received 14 years ago from Father Martin Alveda, who had told her that it was for when words fail, and Blackthorne hanging upon this cross with everything he had within him for the whole of the episode, even as he was about to commit seppuku, demonstrated that he was filled with pain and had no words that would make everything better. There was one scene that was extremely difficult to watch. He was sitting with Fujisama, and there was an empty space next to them, which was where Mariko used to sit. The absence was felt, and you could tell he felt the same way. Even when he boarded the boat to return to Ieyasu and burst into tears thinking about her, it was a tremendous moment. The background score also added to the scene's effectiveness. Mariko urged the church to spare John's life after her death and made sure he wasn't ambushed. It demonstrated her concern for him, and he liked the fact that he was a thought in her mind in what would have been her last moments. John's statement that he was praying to a God, not a Protestant God or a Catholic God, but just a God, demonstrated that he had placed the war that he had within him on hold before landing on the shores of Japan, demonstrating that he didn't care. Even when he encountered Toranaga, he told him that he didn't need the war and that it was a minor conflict, demonstrating that Japan and Mariko had transformed him, and he was no longer the same guy he was when he first came. It wasn't until the end of the show that we saw him release go of Mariko, as he dropped her cross in the water while Fujisama spread her family's ashes there. Her words, "Let your hands be the last to hold hers," struck me as a good touch. John stated that a soul devoted to the sea goes on forever. Therefore, his inclusion of his beliefs in this case, as well as the connection of two separate cultures, was something I found appealing. During this episode, Blackthorne also experienced some unusual events. For example, when he encountered Omi, it was very different from previous occasions. They were both respectful of one another, and Omi handed over the swords and gun with ease. This was so different from the hatred in the earlier episodes. In addition, in the episode's finale, Toda Buntaro assisted Blackthorne in getting his ship out of the ocean. That is something I don't think anyone expected, but the fact that it happened demonstrated that Blackthorne has a place in Japan. He was no longer the savage that the locals saw him as when he first arrived. The people were no longer savages as he had assumed. There was now mutual respect between the two of them, and he had discovered where he thought he needed to be. Yabushige's fate, Yabushige's arc, was both intricate and easy throughout the show. He was a man who did everything he could to survive and avoid death, but by the end of the show, death was the only thing that awaited him. Toranaga's spy in Osaka stated that they witnessed Yabushige lead the shinobi inside the castle on the night Lady Mariko was assassinated, and the fact that he was consumed with guilt after her death was a telltale clue that he was involved. We witnessed his regretful character in the first portion, when he whispered "forgive me" when John was cradling Mariko's lifeless body, indicating that he understood he'd committed a tremendous mistake at that point. With Ishido congratulating him for his commitment and promising him a position on the council if Ishido won the war, it was the last thing Yabushige thought about. He'd almost lost the storyline because of his involvement. The earthquake that occurred when Ishido informed the regents that they would be going to war with Toranaga. He reminded Yabushige of a time when the former Taiko was about to go to war with Toranaga, but recognized the earthquake as a bad omen and was obliged to make peace with him. So as Yabushige reflected on that moment, I believe he regarded it as a sign that he had made the wrong decision and knew he would meet his fate when he returned to the fishing town of Ejiro. The urgency with which he begged the engine to sail to England with him was nearly diametrically opposed to the moment at the start of the show in the first episode. When the Jesuits brought John in front of him in episode 1, Yabushige took control of his life. And now, in this case, John was Yabushige's only hope for survival, and there was no pity expressed, with John just replying, "Pull yourself together." Yabushige lost all of his soldiers, who were now loyal to Toranaga as a result of his traitorous actions. Even Omi relayed to Toranaga the information he had been given about Yabushige's involvement. Although it was not specifically stated, I believe this was a test Toranaga had set for Omi, and if Omi did not pass on the information, he would have known. Toranaga is a master of deception. Nothing escapes him. Toranaga ordered Yabushige to do seppuku the next day, and I thought this moment and encounter with Toranaga and Yabushige, two long-time friends who never truly trusted each other, was one of the greatest in the show. Yabushige's seppuku was more public in the 1980s miniseries, but the private character of this one benefited the show greatly. I was anticipating Yabushige to hand over his katana to Blackthorne, like he did in the 1980s episode, but he didn't. I hoped to see it since it would have been a signal of respect, demonstrating that Yabushige respected Blackthorne as a person and no longer saw him as a barbarian. But I think the fact that he requested if he may be the person to second him before it was rejected fulfilled that goal. Yabushige's death poem piqued my interest as well. Don't burn or bury my dead body. Instead, leave it in the field and feed the belly of some hungry dog. This taught me two distinct lessons. Yabushige saw the disloyal part of himself and a lack of allegiance that was in his blood, and as a result, he did not believe he deserved a burial or ceremony. But I also noticed that Yabushige recognized the importance of being able to supply food and strength to a dog that would feast on him, allowing life to continue. Which one do I suppose Yabushige believed? That's something we'll never know, but I believe he would see the value of being able to provide strength to an animal. The inclusion of his final will, which we witnessed him write on numerous occasions throughout the presentation, revising it as he thought he was getting closer to death. It was a good touch for him to surprise his writer, demonstrating that he accomplished it himself in secret. Yabushige was about to die, and the chilling line Toranaga said to him, "Why tell the dead man the future?" The last lines were particularly distressing. Yabushige's absence does not disrupt daily life. He was vital to Toranaga's strategy, yet he did not fit into the world that Toranaga will finally lead. It was an ideal method to conclude the character's arc. Toranaga's plan, the major point of Shogun, was Toranaga's plan. Toranaga declared war at the start of the first episode. Ishido and his men being mobilized for war in episode 10 demonstrated how far behind he was in terms of intelligence as compared to Toranaga. The remark, "I sent a woman to do what an army couldn't," literally turned the tide for Toranaga and the subsequent Battle of Sekigahara. Crimson Sky was complete, and Mariko led the army that stormed into Osaka. Ishido and the regents agreed to go to war, despite the fact that Lord Kiyama and Lord Ono were opposed to what had occurred to Lady Mariko and believed that going to war was the wrong decision. They appeared to be afraid of leaving Ishido because of what happened to Sujama and the fate he encountered, and they did not want to face the same fate. So with Mariko murdered, Lady Ochiba no Kota's presence in the background of the shot throughout this entire exchange was poignant since she was the only person who could affect events on the battlefield. In the previous episode, Mariko asked Lady Ochiba, "Aren't you tired of all of this?" And it appeared like Toranaga realized that killing Mariko and communicating with Lady Ochiba before she died would be extremely valuable, and it accomplished exactly that. Lady Ochiba wrote a poem called "Flowers Are Only Flowers Because They Fall," which was borrowed from Mariko. She added the line, "But thankfully the breeze." This statement seemed to have a deeper meaning for Toranaga. Toranaga was the wind in this situation. It was reported that he could manipulate the wind to his will, and Toranaga assumed he had studied it. So in the hidden note, the reference to the wind was Toranaga, and Lady Ochiba was demonstrating her loyalty to Toranaga. What the show did not reveal was Ishido's eventual fate. According to the history books, Ishido Mitsunari fled the battlefield after losing and was later discovered and apprehended by local villagers. When he was apprehended, he lost his head, which was displayed in Kyoto for everyone to see. Many other daimyos in the Western Army who backed Ishido were executed as well. Toranaga desired this because he envisioned a peaceful, unified Japan with no battles, which he would begin in Edo. Yabushige hinted that Toranaga wished to be shogun of that unified Japan, but Toranaga never responded, nor did he ever admit to anybody that he desired to be. But I believe Toranaga did. That was his ultimate goal. According to history, the genuine heir to the Taiko was allowed to stay in Osaka Castle after Ieyasu Tokugawa became shogun. However, over time, Ieyasu Tokugawa launched repeated attacks on Osaka Castle in order to seize control of it. Tokugawa's soldiers were too strong for Hidori during the summer siege of Osaka in 1615, prompting both him and his mother to commit seppuku. So despite the show showcasing Lady Ochiba no Kota's loyalty and Toranaga's concern for the successor, if the program had continued, Toranaga would have done whatever he thought was necessary to become the monarch. Toranaga was also shown in this episode to be responsible for the destruction of John Blackthorne's ship, the Erasmus. This was done to retain the engine in Japan. One thing I felt this demonstrated was Toranaga's disposable attitude towards the life of the locals. He was executing them to reinforce the lie he devised to convince Blackthorne that it was Christians who had destroyed it. We hadn't seen Toranaga's ruthlessness in the program before, but it was one method of showing us how far he was willing to go to be convincing. At the end of the episode, we saw Blackthorne stare up at Toranaga as he watched the ship being taken from the ocean, a scenario reminiscent of the 1980s miniseries. Blackthorne laughed quietly, almost as if he had finally figured out Toranaga's intentions after all this time. As Toranaga stood on the brink, the camera moved behind him, the music crescendoed, and the title Shogun appeared. It was an excellent way to wrap out the concert, and it was epic in every sense of the word. My assessment of the episode: I think this was an excellent Shogun episode. Am I disappointed that we did not get to see the Battle of Sekigahara? I don't believe so. Battle sequences are undoubtedly exciting to watch, but as I already stated, this show was about Toranaga, not the build-up to the battle. How he handled people, the game, and his journey to become shogun. It's also astonishing that we didn't see him become it. We left him with a lot of work to accomplish, which I liked because it demonstrated his intelligence and leadership abilities. We foresaw the end before it happened. Toranaga was the falcon he cared about. Toranaga described in episode 1 how a falcon conceals itself against the sun to conserve energy and waits for its opportunity. Toranaga's release during this episode demonstrated that his moment had arrived, and he was ready to take the plan to the next level. The casting in this program was simply amazing. Everyone did an excellent job with their roles, and I think each and every character was conveyed in the appropriate manner. Whether it's the enigmatic, sinister nature of Lady Ochiba no Kata, the very human and empathic Eiichi Mariko, the troubled John Blackthorne, the disloyal Yabushige, or the composed tactical commander of Yosha Toranaga. I believe this final episode might have been a little longer though. Not that there were any pace issues, but I did feel like there were instances where things were attempting to be wrapped up and needed to be handled, which I don't think would have felt the same if there had been an extra 15 or 20 minutes. I believe the final episode had the best score of the entire series. Each piece of music complemented the setting beautifully. Whether it was the closing scene or the one that accompanied Blackthorne's departure from Osaka, the latter stood out for me. Shogun will undoubtedly go down as one of the best miniseries ever created. It's already high in the rankings, and I believe time will help it as well. It's just a perfect show set in a time period that is rarely depicted on TV, and the story that James Clavell produced 50 years ago is still as powerful as it was then. It's been an incredible delight to be able to watch this program, and while they've stated that there will be no Season 2, I'd love it if there was anything set in the same world or universe. Whether it's a prequel or a spin-off, it's simply too amazing to let sit. But perhaps it is what makes it so beautiful. Flowers are just flowers because they fall. So, that concludes episode 10 of Shogun. Click on the card in the top corner to see more Shogun videos. There is a playlist dedicated to breaking down each episode of the show. Alternatively, you can simply go to the channel and find them all. I'll be releasing a somewhat different film in the coming days that focuses on Shogun, so stay tuned to find out what it is. What did you think of the ending? Please share your ideas in the comments below. As again, thank you for watching the Shogun videos. Every week, we've had a terrific time analyzing the show and swapping theories, so I will see you in the next video.